The city street pulsed with energy that afternoon, as people hurried along busy sidewalks and cars raced by in a blur of color and sound. Amid the vibrant urban chaos, a young black woman walked confidently down the road. Her stride was purposeful, and her eyes fixed on an important destination, as if each step carried the weight of a mission. The surrounding bustle, conversations, laughter, the clatter of street vendors created an atmosphere of normalcy. Yet beneath this outward display of city life, an undercurrent of tension simmered, whispering warnings to those who dared to stand out. Nearby, leaning casually against a gleaming patrol car, a white police officer watched her intently. His posture was rigid, his eyes narrowing as he tracked her movements with suspicion. The officer's presence exuded entitlement. His expression darkened with every step she took. He shifted his weight, the glare in his eyes suggesting that he believed he had every right to intervene. Without warning, he stepped forward. In a low, condescending tone, he called, "Excuse me, ma'am, what are you doing in this area? Show me your identification right now." His voice was stern, and there was a slight sneer on his face, as though he believed she simply did not belong there. The woman paused and turned slowly to face him. Her expression remained composed and calm, a quiet defiance shining in her eyes. "Am I being detained?" she asked politely, her voice clear and steady. "Or am I free to go?" She did not offer her ID. Instead, she met his gaze with respectful firmness, confident in knowing her rights. The officer's face tightened, frustration evident as he barked, "I need to see your ID right now. You're causing a disturbance." His words dripped with insinuation that her mere presence was enough to warrant suspicion. A cool breeze stirred fallen leaves along the sidewalk, as if nature acknowledged the intensity of the moment. The young woman's determined gaze and the officer's suspicious frown set the stage for a clash, exposing underlying truths about bias and identity. In that single tense encounter, the energy of the city was juxtaposed with silent judgment, threatening to divide the community it celebrated. The black woman continued her walk with unwavering confidence, her steps measured and determined. As she moved along the bustling street, the white officer intercepted her with an authoritative stride that contrasted sharply with her serene composure. "Excuse me, ma'am, what are you doing in this area? Show me your identification right now," he demanded, his tone laced with condescension. His eyes, cold and accusatory, fixed on her as if her very presence were an offense. She stopped, turned slowly, and met his gaze with a calm that belied the tension of the moment. "Am I being detained?" she asked politely, her voice resonant and steady. "Or am I free to go?" Her words carried the assurance of someone well aware of her legal rights, and she neither flinched nor hurried her response. The officer's face reddened with irritation as he repeated his demand. "I said, show me your ID now," he snapped, stepping closer and gesturing sharply toward her. Around them, a small crowd began to form. Curious onlookers pulled out their phones, whispering among themselves. Some exchanged puzzled glances, while others shook their heads at what they perceived as blatant overreach. Despite the mounting scrutiny, she maintained her composure. "I understand you have orders," she said, her tone even and respectful. "But can you please tell me if I'm being detained for any legal reason? I assure you, I am not causing a disturbance." Her measured words seemed to unsettle the officer further. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he grumbled, "Don't question my authority. You're in a restricted area, and I have every right to stop you." He swept his hand in a dismissive gesture toward the busy street behind her, implying that her presence alone was problematic. Yet she stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. Taking a steadying breath, she asked, "Are you familiar with the rules regarding stopping someone without probable cause?" Her question, delivered in a respectful yet challenging tone, hung in the air. For a long moment, the officer's features shifted, uncertainty flickering briefly across his face before he snapped back, "That is none of your business." His reply, though harsh, had lost some of its earlier venom. Around them, murmurs from the growing crowd amplified the tension. People watched intently as the balance of power subtly shifted. The woman's calm assertion began to undermine his authority. "I have every right to be here, and I know my rights," she stated softly but firmly. "If you have a legal basis for detaining me, please explain it clearly. Otherwise, I ask that you let me continue on my way." Her words resonated with the onlookers, drawing nods of approval and quiet murmurs of agreement. The officer's frustration was palpable as he fumbled for a response. His posture faltered, and after a moment he mumbled, I'm just doing my job." His earlier bluster was now replaced by hesitation. The respectful challenge he received had exposed a gap between his perception of duty and the actual legal standards governing stops on the street. As the exchange continued, the crowd's interest grew. Every eye was fixed on the confrontation, a woman calmly insisting on her rights in the face of unyielding authority. Her measured tone and dignified stance made it clear that she would not be intimidated. With every word she spoke, she reminded everyone present that respect and lawful conduct were not negotiable. In that moment, the street's tension shifted from one of intimidation to empowerment, as her quiet defiance shone as an example for all who witnessed it. The officer, now struggling to maintain control, could only watch as the reality of his actions unfolded before an increasingly aware audience. As the standoff persisted, a subtle change began to ripple through the gathering crowd. The officer, still reeling from the woman's calm challenge, started to appear less certain. His face, previously set in a mask of authoritative disdain, now showed hints of confusion. A murmur of discontent ran through the onlookers, their collective gaze challenging him to justify his actions. Amid this growing scrutiny, the woman maintained her quiet dignity. Her steady, unwavering voice seemed to draw out the truth, that every individual deserved respect, regardless of appearance or circumstance. Slowly, a younger officer who had been observing from the periphery stepped forward. His eyes, softened by understanding, met the gaze of the confronting officer. "Sir, might I remind you," he said in a measured tone, "that our duty is to uphold the law with fairness and respect. Stopping someone without clear cause undermines that very principle." His words, calm yet authoritative, resonated with those around him. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, transforming from a mere background hum into a chorus of support for the woman's right to remain undeterred. The tension in the air seemed to crackle as the senior officer shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence waning. The woman, sensing this subtle power shift, continued, "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm simply asking for you to respect my rights. I have done nothing to warrant being stopped or treated as a suspect." Her voice was quiet, yet every syllable carried the weight of her conviction. The officer's eyes darted around, as if seeking validation from his colleagues, but the supportive glances from the crowd only emboldened her further. "You have the authority to detain someone only if you have probable cause," she added, her tone even and precise. "Can you please explain to me, without ambiguity, what legal basis you have for stopping me?" Her question, directed at him, cut through the air and left little room for evasion. For a moment, the officer opened his mouth as if to respond, but then closed it again, his expression a mixture of frustration and uncertainty. The younger officer's interjection had sown doubt among those who had previously supported the action. The atmosphere was now charged with a palpable shift in power, a shift that celebrated the woman's quiet defiance and exposed the fragility of unexamined authority. In that fraught silence, the officer's earlier bravado crumbled. His attempts to intimidate were no longer met with fear, but with respectful resistance that questioned his every assumption. I'm just following orders," he finally muttered, his voice barely audible. But his words rang hollow in the face of the clear legality of her stance. As the crowd's attention fixed on the unfolding drama, the woman's calm persistence had transformed the encounter. It was no longer simply about an ID or a supposed disturbance. It was about the principles of fairness and the right to be treated with dignity. Every onlooker could sense that this was a defining moment, a confrontation where authority was being held accountable by the quiet strength of one determined individual. The woman's steady gaze, combined with her respectful yet firm insistence on her rights, had turned the tide. The officer's power, once unquestioned, now wavered under the weight of truth and the collective scrutiny of an informed public. In that moment, the balance shifted unmistakably. The street, alive with the hum of everyday life just beyond the scene, bore witness to a quiet revolution, one where respect, law, and dignity triumphed over baseless authority. As the officer struggled to regain his footing, the woman's calm response stood as a beacon of empowerment, a reminder that even in the face of unchecked power, one voice could challenge the status quo and demand justice. The crowd, once passive, now erupted in quiet support, their eyes and voices united in affirming the woman's unassailable right to remain free and respected. Her steadfast patience had not only exposed the flaws in the officer's actions, but had also illuminated the path toward a more equitable and just society. At length, as the exchange deepened, the officer's frustration boiled over into aggression. He stepped forward again, his tone rising as he attempted to reassert control. "I am in charge here," he declared, his voice echoing off the surrounding buildings. "You're disrupting the peace by questioning my orders. I have every right to stop you without your consent." His words, intended to intimidate, instead only fanned the flames of dissent among the onlookers. The woman, undeterred by his escalating anger, maintained her composure. "I respectfully remind you that I have done nothing to warrant this treatment," she said softly. "If you have a legal basis for your actions, I ask you to state it clearly. Otherwise, I will not be subjected to unnecessary harassment." Her calm tone contrasted sharply with his raised voice, deepening the chasm between their attitudes. The officer's face flushed as he sputtered, "You're making trouble out of nothing." His tone shifted into one of indignation, but the surrounding crowd was no longer silent. Murmurs of disapproval rose among the spectators, many shaking their heads in disbelief at the officer's blatant disregard for proper procedure. A few onlookers even began recording the confrontation on their smartphones, their devices capturing every word and gesture. Growing increasingly agitated, the officer took an aggressive step closer, attempting to seize her arm in a show of dominance. "I don't care what your rights are," he growled, his voice strained with frustration. "You need to calm down and comply." His attempt at physical intimidation was met with a firm, steady recoil from the woman, who effortlessly sidestepped his grasp. "I will not allow you to treat me as if I am less than human," she stated clearly, her eyes flashing with determined resolve. The crowd's murmur swelled into audible discontent as more voices joined in silent protest against the officer's behavior. A man in the crowd called out, "That's not how you treat a citizen," while another added, "Respect her rights." The officer's face contorted with a mixture of anger and confusion as he tried to reassert his authority. "You're causing a disturbance," he insisted, his voice growing harsher with each word. "I have orders to maintain control, and you're challenging that." Undeterred, she replied, "I am simply exercising my right to remain free from unlawful detention. Your behavior here is in direct violation of that right, and I will not stand for it." Her measured tone resonated with the onlookers, who now watched intently, their collective gaze a silent force urging him to reconsider his actions. In a final, desperate bid to regain control, the officer attempted one last time to seize her attention by shouting, "I'm warning you. Stop arguing, or you'll have to face the consequences." But his threat fell flat amid the growing support from the crowd. Several bystanders stepped forward, their expressions stern as they signaled that such conduct was unacceptable. His attempts to intimidate her were met not with fear, but with quiet defiance. The woman's words had laid bare the injustice of his actions, and the collective disapproval in the air made it clear that his authority was rapidly dissolving. With every word she spoke, she chipped away at the very foundation of his baseless power, leaving him isolated and exposed in front of a community that would no longer tolerate such behavior. In the days that followed the confrontation, the repercussions of the officer's actions rippled through the department and the community alike. The incident was widely reported in the local media, and video footage captured by bystanders went viral, igniting public outrage over the blatant abuse of power. Within hours, the officer was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation, and his superiors issued a statement condemning the behavior witnessed on that busy street. At an internal meeting convened to address the incident, the officer faced a panel of high-ranking officials. There, in a stark, fluorescent-lit conference room, he was reprimanded for his conduct. The tone was somber, and his explanations, feeble attempts to justify his actions, fell on deaf ears. The head of internal affairs, a respected figure known for upholding accountability, oversaw the proceedings and made it clear that such behavior would no longer be tolerated. The officer was forced to confront not only the consequences of his own actions, but also the systemic issues that allowed such conduct to persist unchecked. Meanwhile, the woman continued to receive praise for her composure and steadfast insistence on her rights. Community leaders and civil rights activists commended her bravery in standing up to unjust authority. In neighborhoods across the city, citizens held vigils and rallies calling for greater accountability and reform within the police force. The incident had sparked a broader conversation about the importance of respecting the rights of every individual, regardless of appearance, and about the urgent need to address systemic racism in law enforcement. The woman's calm demeanor and respectful defiance had become a symbol of hope for many, a reminder that one voice, when raised in defense of justice, could initiate significant change. In community meetings and public forums, people recounted the day's events as a turning point, a moment when authority was challenged and the dignity of every citizen was reaffirmed. The officer's actions were dissected in detail, and calls for comprehensive reform grew louder by the day. Through it all, the woman remained gracious and poised. She continued to advocate for fairness and proper treatment under the law, urging others to know their rights and stand firm against injustice. Her experience had not only highlighted the deep flaws within the system, but had also inspired a movement toward accountability. As community support swelled and tangible reforms began to take shape, it was clear that the lesson learned from that confrontation would not soon be forgotten. The afternoon light bathed the city streets in a warm, golden glow as she stepped out of the courthouse, her head held high and her spirit emboldened by the victories of the day. No longer just a figure of authority bound by rules and regulations, she had become a symbol of change, strength, and justice. Each step she took was a testament to her unwavering commitment to fairness, a living reminder that one person's courage can spark a revolution in the hearts of many. As she walked along the busy sidewalk, the noise of the city seemed to blend into a harmonious background score. Passers-by, once indifferent, now greeted her with nods of respect and smiles of admiration. Their eyes, filled with recognition and hope, followed her every stride as if witnessing the embodiment of empowerment. She moved with a calm confidence that had been hard-won from years of struggle, her demeanor radiating a sense of purpose that transcended the ordinary. Every corner of the city whispered stories of past injustices and the slow, persistent fight for equality. Today, she had rewritten one chapter of that long narrative. Her presence on those streets, dignified and resolute, had become a powerful reminder to everyone that real change begins with a single step. As she strolled along, the once harsh murmurs of prejudice and doubt had been replaced by supportive cheers and encouraging glances from community members who believed in a fairer future. At a small park near a row of blooming trees, she paused for a moment, taking in the scene around her. The laughter of children playing, the soft murmur of conversations among friends on benches, and even the gentle rustling of leaves all seemed to echo the promise of a renewed society. In that tranquil moment, she reflected on the day's events, the confrontation with unchecked authority, the public outcry that had forced accountability, and the way her actions had inspired others to stand up for what was right. She knew the fight for equality was far from over, but each victory, however small, added a vital brick to the foundation of a just community. With a deep, steadying breath, she resumed her walk. Her thoughts drifted to the countless individuals who had suffered in silence, whose voices had been drowned out by the clamor of injustice. Today, she had lent her voice to theirs. Every stride was infused with the determination to continue the struggle, to fight for those who were still voiceless. In her mind, the words of a beloved mentor echoed, "Change is not handed to us. It is earned by standing up, even when you feel small." And indeed, as she moved forward, she felt every bit the giant her convictions made her. The camera of life seemed to pan out slowly, capturing her solitary figure against the sprawling urban backdrop. Skyscrapers stood tall, their windows reflecting the promise of a new dawn, while the bustling streets below carried the pulse of a community awakening. In that expansive moment, it became clear that her journey was not a solitary one. It was interwoven with the hopes and dreams of an entire generation seeking justice and equality. Her footsteps resonated on the pavement like a drumbeat, a steady rhythm signaling that every stride was a step toward real, transformative change. At a busy intersection, she paused briefly as a group of young people approached, their faces bright with admiration. One of them shyly offered a heartfelt thank you, acknowledging that her example had inspired them to speak up against injustice. She smiled gently and placed a reassuring hand on their shoulder, silently promising that the fight for fairness would continue, together as a united community. Her gaze then lifted to meet the horizon, where the sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows that danced alongside her, a metaphor for the challenges that still lay ahead, but also for the hope that persevered. In that final, quiet moment, as she continued her walk with renewed determination, she knew that the battle for equality would persist. Yet every act of courage, every victory over prejudice, would serve as a beacon to light the way forward. With every step she embodied the promise of a better future, a future where justice and respect were not privileges for a few, but the inalienable rights of all. And so, under the vast, ever-changing sky, her journey continued, a powerful reminder that true empowerment is both a personal victory and a call to collective action.